Thanks very much, Giselle, and thank you, Luke. It's been really fantastic to organise this event with the Sustainable Living Festival Foundation, collaboration that we really value. The American environmentalist and author and thinker, Paul Hawken, gave a great graduation speech at Portland University about 5 years ago. And he began his speech by saying, "When I was invited to give this speech, I was asked if I could give a simple short talk that was direct, naked, taut, honest, passionate, lean, shivering, startling and graceful. No pressure there. I have 15 minutes to discuss the new era of activism that is changing everything about the way we campaign on climate change. No pressure there." Most climate change presentations that I've given or attended have focused on what changes need to happen in the external world, which power stations need to shut, how quickly we need to decarbonise, how quickly we can accelerate renewable energy. This presentation asks a more difficult question. What do we need to change about ourselves as an environment and a climate movement to safeguard life on Earth? All climate campaigners have had oh shit moments, when the scientific reality of global warming and the pathway we're on has pierced through our coping mechanisms and our day-to-day busyness. I had one when I was working at Greenpeace, and I met Carteret Islanders from Papua New Guinea who were the first environmental refugees, climate refugees fleeing their country. Had another on Black Saturday when a colleague of mine from Greenpeace and a friend, James Gormley, lost his life somewhere near Marysville with his girlfriend trying to escape the heat and the fire. I must say though that David Spratt's been responsible for more than his fair share of oh shit moments for me. His latest paper, which he has presented tonight, is an incredibly important challenge to the orthodoxy of what achieving a safe climate requires, and his ability to summarise really complex scientific information is a really important and unique contribution. When I say unique, there are others in this room who've made a similar contribution. I'm thinking of people like Phil Sutton as well, but it's a really important contribution. And he's right, environmentalists don't spend enough time thinking about and understanding the scientific implications and then thinking about what that means in terms of the policy we're advocating for and how we communicate what we're trying to do. So then, how does where we're at change what we do? How do we reconcile the scientific imperative to decarbonise immediately with the political denial of delaying and denial tactics? And obviously no one person has all the answers, but I'm going to walk through some principles I'd like to share with you, which I think are relevant for environment groups and climate activists. And some of these principles we've been developing and trying to embed at Environment Victoria over the past few years. And some of them are starting to emerge with some consensus from a conversation that's been had by a lot of the national and state environment groups. It's been wrangled and coordinated by Sam LaRocca, who's here tonight, and there'll be a bit more information about a following on conversation a little bit later. So I'll claim responsibility for the ideas that you like, and I'll accept no blame for the ones you dislike. So the first principle, it may sound fairly obvious, but our starting point should be this. There's already too much pollution in the atmosphere, and therefore we need to reduce emissions to zero as quickly as possible. And of course, there have been people saying this for some time, very clearly. Groups like Beyond Zero Emissions have been saying that very loudly and clearly for a long time now. But as David says, the scientific basis for this principle is devastatingly clear. If you accept the logic that there is no carbon budget left, and that we're in dangerous territory already, and then that means no more fossil fuel extraction, no more coal mines, no new gas wells, and at a personal level, it poses a real challenge to our high consumption and emission lifestyles and a moral imperative to eliminate our own emissions. But in my view, reducing emissions to zero is our objective, not our campaign. If we confuse our objective with our campaign, then we'll go charging the fortress. And then with our demands for zero emissions, and then we'll wonder where all the reinforcements are. And I guess it's similar to the point that Paul was making around the need to have a vision and the need to have a positive vision for what we're trying to achieve. Our objective will have to be achieved through hard-fought progress across individual campaigns designed to have inbuilt tipping points and virtuous circles, forcing renewables into the mix, forcing down energy demand, which in turn makes possible decommissioning sites of pollution. So second principle, and I think this is one that we're starting to get as the climate movement now, but we're not having a rational conversation about policy, it's all about power. This is Twiggy Forrest, the $6 billion man with Julia Bishop, at one of a couple of rallies that the mining industry held. They held a couple of rallies, they spent about $20 million on an advertising campaign, and they overturned the mining tax. What we're trying to achieve is the complete transformation, or if they don't want to transform, the elimination of the fossil fuel sector. And they won't go quietly, and we currently don't have enough power to win. So it's important that we recognise this, because otherwise we'll embark on courageous and noble campaigns that will ultimately be fruitless. So we need to build our power. The third principle, to build power, we need to reorient our organisations and develop long-term strategies. Now, there's different ways of building power. I'm going to talk about one way that Environment Victoria is trying to build some power by changing its approach. So with the election of the Baillieu government in 2010, it became very clear that business as usual campaigning, where we had 3 or 4 priority issues and we were trying to achieve progress on those issues, was not going to work, because we could run successful campaigns, and we're capable of doing that, but we could run strong campaigns on 3 issues and maybe hold the line, or maybe in fact get a win or 2, but while we were doing so we were going to lose on 15 or 20 other issues. So we recognised that the environment was not high profile enough as an issue, and we recognised and understood and learnt about the theory of community organising, which was that the most powerful way of changing people's minds and elevating the status of an issue was through face-to-face conversations with a trusted messenger or neighbour. So we invested in reorienting our organisation. We sent staff members to do the Sierra Club training. The Sierra Club's been doing that community organising training really effectively and has closed 150 coal-fired power stations in the US. We employed organisers. First we employed a single organiser, then we employed a second organiser. We've now got a couple of, or 3 organising interns working with us. We're really focused on growing our supporter base. So we've grown our supporter base in the last 3 years from 14,000 people to 64,000 people today. And we really work to engage and mobilise our supporter base. So we ask people to commit, to become volunteers and volunteer at least 1 day a month. We've got an active volunteer base now of around 800 people, with 300 people really deeply involved. So as organisations and a movement, we have a choice about where we invest our resources, and we can choose to commission research, we can choose to employ lobbyists, and we can choose to invest in ad campaigns, and we might need to do all of those things, or we can choose to invest in community organising. And to give you a sense of the relativities in terms of that investment, the Sierra Club employs 2 organisers for every single campaigner position it employs. So they recognise that there's a much bigger task in building the power to execute your campaign outcome than there is in knowing what the right answer is and knowing how to talk about it. You actually need to invest much more in building the power. And critical to this is recognising that there's no shortcuts. You know, the environment movement has for a long time tried to take shortcuts, you know, through desperation perhaps. You know, all the work that's happened in Canberra, trying to get an emissions trading scheme in place, but there wasn't the power there to hold it there when there was a change of government. So critical to deciding to build power for the long term is not deviating from that strategy. I mean, we've got this potential conundrum in Victoria. There could be a change of government in Victoria in 40 days. There may not be, but there could be. We could get a government that is significantly better than the current government, or may not be. But we could get some good climate policies, and it would be a real mistake, in my view, for an organisation like Environment Victoria to stop the community organising strategy, to start just spending our time up on Spring Street, you know, just going off on a lobbying strategy. We've really got to continue building our power. So just a couple more slides on how we've tried to do this, and I'll move through this quickly. But a longer term commitment to building power requires that we decide which areas are going to be our priority areas, and they have to be the areas that have the most political impact at every single election, whether it's state or federal. So we're working most deeply in 4 seats: Forest Hill, Mordialloc, Carrum and Frankston. Oops, oh, it's an interactive screen. And falls within 2 also marginal federal seats that are relevant at every single federal election. And we've set ourselves a number of targets. We're trying to increase our supporter base in those 4 state seats, which have around about 140,000 voters, to 15,000 people supporting Environment Victoria in those 4 seats. We're trying to have 20,000 face-to-face conversations with undecided voters, leading to 4,000 meaningful discussions and 2,000 people pledging to vote with the environment in mind. We're doing research to make sure that we're really targeting our resources properly. So this is a map of Forest Hill by statistical division, which shows where the swinging voters are most likely to be. So the darker areas are where there's a higher proportion of undecided voters, which means that if we're asking our volunteers to go and knock on a door on a Sunday afternoon to have a conversation with people there, we can send them to the places where they're most likely to be having an effective and influential conversation. And just while I'm on that point, we are recruiting people to do door knocking. We're door knocking every single weekend through to the election, and so you might see a sheet coming around, and if you're interested in getting involved, it'd be fantastic. We really need your help. So this is all a work in progress, and as people who understand community organising deeply will tell you, this is unfinished business and we've got a long way to go. The movement really needs to get to the point where a lot of organisations are doing this in a lot of parts of the country. So for instance, we're working in 2 federal electorates. If we want to be powerful as a movement, we need to be doing this in 15, 20, 25 electorates around the country. And the only way we're ever going to be able to do that is to collaborate and share on some of the really important fundamentals. So we need to develop a national voter file, for instance, in this, or at least in the seats that we're working in. We need to be able to track where individual voters and households are at on an issue, what issues they respond to, whether they are a soft supporter or a strong supporter of climate action, and we need to share that information across organisations, because it's no point in Environment Victoria being there door knocking one day and then 3 days later someone from GetUp knocks on the door. It's a really inefficient way for us to do our business, and we need to share the data in the databases, which is really hard because, as we all know, environment groups, we all have our own turf, we all have our own funding models, all those sorts of things. Quite often they're reliant upon databases and upon supporter bases. So getting to the point where we can actually share some of that information is where we need to go if we want to be successful. And we're also, I guess, just another example of how we're changing where we spend our money. So this is the shop front that we opened in Frankston that we've had going there for the past 4 or 5 months, where we're having hundreds of conversations a week with undecided voters in Frankston. And it's the Mayor of Frankston, the Liberal Party Mayor of Frankston, cutting the ribbon and opening the shop front. Not sure he knew what he was getting into, but anyway. So just final slide on this principle. This is some of you would have seen Anat Shanker-Rosario, who presented at the Progress 2013 conference, and she's a cognitive linguist. And she's done some fascinating communications research about what we say and what people actually hear and how we need to change the story that we're telling. But she had a 9-word mission statement that I think we should all adopt, which is our mission as a movement is to mobilise the base, that's us, to convert the middle and undermine the opposition. And that really, if there's one thing that you remember from this set of slides around building power, I think that's our basic mission statement. So principle 4, it's a bit of a dodgy slide. To achieve emissions reductions, we need to close existing sources of pollution. Now this may sound obvious, but it's worried me for some time that I don't know that the climate movement has been particularly focused on this. The reality is emissions won't fall until we're actually decommissioning and closing sites of pollution. I think we've got the split wrong in the movement. I think we've got at least half of the movement working to stop new projects. And I'm not talking about other people and excluding Environment Victoria. We've spent a long time fighting against new coal projects, and we'll have to keep doing that. But I'd say about 50% of the effort of the movement is spent fighting new polluting projects, 20% trying to grow renewable energy, 20% trying to get a coherent policy framework at the federal or state level, whether it's a price on carbon or whatever. And then the remaining 10% is split across things like really important things like energy efficiency, like power station closure, like transport, and a long list of other things. We've got a real golden opportunity. We have the world's most polluting power stations about 150 kilometres that way. And it's going to be much easier to close those power stations now than it was 5 years ago when we were embarking on that campaign that a lot of you in the room were involved in, and we were having really difficult conversations about what can we replace these power stations with. And the world has changed. We don't need to replace these power stations with anything. We've got the National Australian Energy Market Operator saying that we've got 2,000 megawatts of surplus electricity generation in Victoria, and that could be retired with no consequences for energy security. So there's a really big opportunity, and I think it's one the movement should take. Principle 5, and it's not just Hazelwood, you know, there's Anglesea, your lawn. We should start with our oldest and dirtiest, like those three. Principle 5, one of the really interesting parts of David's paper, which he didn't get a chance to talk about, was just that the need, if we want to achieve emergency speed reductions, the critical role of energy efficiency. It's really the only thing that can be deployed at massive scale, at very low cost, extremely quickly. And the only thing you need to understand about this slide is that all the blue and everything below the zero line actually saves us money. So there's a huge amount of abatement, emissions reductions, that can pay for itself. It's not a question of getting someone to dig into their pocket. There might need to be financing mechanisms, but people are going to make their money back and more from everything around improving building efficiency, improving lighting efficiency, car fuel economy, all of that stuff. So we should just be doing it. The International Energy Agency has recognised the massive role of energy efficiency, and it's found that we've actually created more energy through energy efficiency programs, so this is in 2010, than we're getting from all sources of fossil fuels combined. It's the largest supply of energy, according to the International Energy Agency. And where are the really strong energy efficiency campaigns coming from the environment movement? They're pretty hard to see. And there's multiple benefits. These are the sort of slippery slope campaigns that deliver multiple benefits. This is my next door neighbour's house, Jack. He must be about 80. He lives in a house that's less than 2 stars. He's got health issues. You know, this is the average standard of Victorian homes. 1.9 million Victorian homes average about 2 stars. So we've got a state election which is about infrastructure, and our most important infrastructure, you know, our homes, has so far been neglected. So I'll move on to Principle 6. I've only got 2 more. I'm being polite. Our communications efforts have a lot of room for improvement. I think that's an example from the Australia Institute, which I think is actually a really good example of communication. They've done a lot of work highlighting the fact that the mining industry, the oil and gas industry, is nowhere near as powerful or as big a contributor to economic activity as most people think they are. So I think that's sort of an exception to the rule. But the questions I think we need to be asking are, you know, do we have an effective narrative? If you were trying to convince an undecided voter or a person who hadn't made up their minds how to act on the issue, what story would you be telling them? And is it based on testing? You know, is it based on research? And what level of confidence would you be able to have that it's actually going to cut through? And what arguments would you be using for different sectors? There's a real opportunity for us, and this is one of the climate strategy conversations and opportunities we've identified. There's a real opportunity for us to coordinate response better. So for instance, going back to Black Saturday, I remember feeling like we should be communicating about this as the environment movement. We should put our crash helmets on and walk straight into that debate. I also, you know, the immediate response to that debate was it was actually our fault. Remember, it was the Greenies because there were too many trees around. You know, we were responsible for those fires. And I actually don't think that there was an environmentalist who felt up to the job of walking into that terrible space and actually saying, this is what climate change looks like. and it was really missing from the response. There's ways that we can coordinate our responses much better, and one of the conversations that's been had by the national groups as part of this climate strategy is that we could have a hub for communication, so that there are people whose job it is to scan the news each day, not on behalf of any one organisation, but just on behalf of the movement, to say, there's an opportunity. Who's the best person to respond to this? Who's the most convincing messenger? Can we find a scientist? Can we find a firefighter? Can we find someone with a lot of credibility who doesn't necessarily have their organisational badge or imperative at the front of their mind? So there's some important conversations there. And finally, in a similar vein, we need to learn to collaborate better. So we need a deliberate strategy, and I think post-federal election there was a bit of a hiatus where people, we could see the train wreck coming, the train wreck happened, and there wasn't really a strategy to respond to it. So developing a shared strategy requires us spending time to work out what the common agenda is, and that takes some time. How do a bunch of different groups from different sectors, and I'm not just talking about the environment movement, I'm talking about the progressive movement more generally. How do we identify what those shared goals are? Is it a retrofit of the Victorian housing stock which delivers heaps of jobs and also delivers health benefits and also delivers emissions reductions? And is that something that the health sector and the unions and others can collaborate around? Those conversations take time. We need to invest in collaboration, and so we need trust and good relationships and deep understanding, and we need some of that shared infrastructure as well. And again, with the movement climate strategy conversation, there's been conversations about is our current infrastructure for the movement the right infrastructure, and do we need different things? So that's things like databases if we're going to be doing community organising, but it's also things like coordinating groups. So we've had the Climate Action Network in Australia. It's done a great job. It's probably outlived its purpose, and we probably need a new version of that. So there's thinking about what is that umbrella that brings together different sectors to collaborate better on climate change. And then there's coordination, division of labour and effort, so and deep coordination around particular issues. And I think the key questions for individuals and organisations is, what is your strongest contribution? We can't be trying to run campaigns across every front. We can't be trying to do reactive media to the latest climate disaster. We need to work out what our areas of speciality are and need to understand who else will deliver tasks and be happy with that division of labour. So I'll finish there, and I'll finish with my favourite. I'll go back to the organising efforts and just finish with my favourite quote. Anyone who's seen me give a presentation before, I always have this one. There's no reason why good cannot triumph as often as evil. The triumph of anything is a matter of organisation. If there are such things as angels, I hope they're organised along the lines of the mafia. Thank you very much.